Chandler, how are you?
I'm good, Aaron. Just trying to execute on this Monday.
There you go. I was trying to tell someone in private about that, and well, I don't want to give anything away, but inside joke, a little inside baseball. We now have met with Nick Saban, and we've had player interviews. They're still working on the fundamentals, but have you heard enough to kind of gauge the mood of this team from where you sit?
I think they're just excited to have a second chance. I think we sort of heard that. I think the first person that sort of said that was when we were in Atlanta. J.K. Scott sort of came out and said, we've got a second chance, and we feel like we can really show, what we're made of. And he mentioned all the injuries they had on defense, and then you sort of were talking to when we talked to the players on Saturday afternoon. You sort of got that same sort of vibe, and it wasn't like an overexcitement. It wasn't like they were bubbling with, just they were happy they got in. I don't think that that's a thing at all. I don't think they're complacent that they, sweated it out and got into the playoffs. But I think, they're rejuvenated a little bit, and I think they're revitalized because, that Iron Bowl loss was deflating, and then, they were in a position that this program hasn't been in a while where they just kind of had to sit and wait and watch. And that can kind of mess with your head. And, I'm sure for some guys that was difficult to sit there for 20 however many days and not know where they were going to play. A lot of these guys have NFL draft decisions to make here soon, and I'm sure that kind of factored in. Will they get a chance to play in for a national championship? And it can play with your mind a lot, and I would imagine some of those guys had to kind of combat that. But now that they're in, you can kind of tell that I found everyone on Saturday was pretty relaxed. They came in. Damian Harris was joking. He stuck around for all the interviews and was joking with everybody that came up. Levi Wallace was pretty lighthearted. Jalen Hurts, I wouldn't say he was lighthearted. I would say he's focused, but that's just kind of how Jalen is, and that's kind of what he's been this whole year. Is he doesn't really kind of deviate from what he wants to say. He wants to remain sort of stoic and focused, and that was him. But there was no sense of, nerves, no sense of anything. I thought, if anything, I'd probably say rejuvenated and kind of, excited for the opportunity is what I got from him.
Chandler, I want to get your take on this, and I may be catching you off guard, but I wrote about it over the weekend. It's Nick Saban was asked about self-scouting, particularly as it pertained to third down on offense and defense. I wrote mainly about the third down struggles on offense. But there was a line in there. We're going to listen to the audio later in the program. But there was a line in there where Nick Saban says, there's nothing we can do about it. And I wanted to get your take. Do you get the sense he was saying, because his answer was really, we've been out on the road recruiting. We really haven't had time to do all that. Do you think his answer pertained to the fact that he's talking about we haven't had time to get to that when he said there's nothing we can do about it? Or was he talking about this is who we are on offense? We're 12 games into this thing. We are who we are.
I think when you look at the juxtaposition of where that question was in the press conference, he had just finished I wouldn't call it a rant, but he had just finished his diatribe about how he still hates the early signing period and how the early signing period's really affected, how they're preparing for this game. And then the question right after that was about the third down self-scouting, and I think he sort of used that as to keep kind of jabbing that knife into the early signing period. Well, I haven't had time. We've been recruiting. Now, I don't think that's true at all. I think Nick Saban, he's a master at this. He can find time to do things when he needs to do them. But his whole illustrated point was that this early signing period has really wreaked havoc on. If you're playing in a meaningless bowl game, if you're playing in a bowl game without much, on the line, then I think you can maybe devote a little more to recruiting. But Nick Saban and Dabo Swinney, for that matter, they're both trying to win a national championship, and now they've got to worry about crossing the country to go on all these home visits. And the coaching carousel, it accelerated with Jeremy Pruitt now, and that's kind of a reflection on the early signing period. So, I think we like to read into things a lot, and I think, when you look at that line, it is a little, startling, but I think more when you look at where that was in the news conference, I think he was just kept wanting to bemoan that early signing period. And, to go to the third down issue in and of itself, I think I'd have to do a little bit more research, but I think, you really need to look at what they do on first and second down, because if they can set up manageable 3rd and 3, 3rd and 4, then it makes it a lot easier than 3rd and 8, 3rd and 10. And you'd have to go back and look and see what those down and distances have been against the top 60 defenses. That was a great stat that you pointed out in that story, that I think they're converting like 29% of 3rd downs against top 60 defenses. But, it's kind of an old cliche and an old adage, but I think it rings true that, you win 3rd downs mainly on 1st and 2nd downs, because if you're in 3rd and 8, 3rd and 10, 3rd and 12, a lot of the times, then you're not going to be very successful.
Talking to Chandler Rome, the Alabama beat writer for the Anniston Star. Yeah, that's a good point. And I actually looked at that, kind of took a dive in that with the Auburn game. And I believe Alabama during that game was, 3 of 11 on 3rd downs. And if you
they've converted 6 3rd downs total in their last 2 SEC games,
which is just pitiful. But against Auburn, they were 3 of 11. And there was a 3rd and 22 in there that's kind of an aberration. So I took that one out. If you take that one out, they were so 3 of 10. And you average those out, then the average to gain was 3rd and 5. So they were in pretty good down and distance situations on 3rd down against Auburn, and still were just kind of miserable. When you've looked at it this year, what stands out to you about this offense? I look at it, I don't see an identity. I haven't seen an identity on this offense all year, either in the run or the pass. I just can't get my finger on what they're trying to do or trying to be.
I think you're right there. I mean, I've actually spent the last couple of days, because obviously I wasn't on the beat. I just started this year, so really the only Alabama offense I've ever watched intently, day after day, is Brian Dable. So in the last few days, I went back and I watched some games from when Lane Kiffin was calling Alabama's offense. And the thing about Lane Kiffin and the thing about just watching his offenses these last couple of days, you never really knew who was going to get the ball, and you never knew how they were going to get it. Now it seems when you watch this offense this year, it seems that if Jalen's going back to pass, it's going to Calvin Ridley, and if Calvin Ridley's covered, then you better hope one of these freshmen can get open and Jalen has enough time to find them. And then, when Josh Jacobs, the only real time I maybe question what's going to happen, or I'm sort of intrigued to see what they're going to do, is when Josh Jacobs gets on the field. They run Josh Jacobs as a jet sweep decoy a lot. They use him in the jet sweep game. They can use him out of the backfield. They can use him just running straight up the gut. So, and Nick Saban, more than once down the stretch of the season said they wanted to get Josh Jacobs more involved. And when he's on the field, you can sort of see that Brian Dable maybe opens it up a little bit. They can use Josh Jacobs in so many ways. But I think that's the biggest difference for me, just from watching what Lane did in these past 3 years and watching now what Brian Dable's doing. It just seems that when this Alabama offense gets on the field and you see what personnel is on the field, you can maybe almost diagram what's about to happen. I don't think he's been formulaic in his calls. I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't go that far, but there's just I wouldn't say there's much creativity. And I know Lane Kiffin maybe got a little bit criticized for his abundant creativity and, not utilizing some guys that maybe thought should get the ball, but now you've kind of reverted back to the opposite. And to me, that's what stands out, is just, it's almost like what's coming. And that's not good, and especially in the passing game, because I mentioned these last couple down, if you look at the Iron Bowl, no receiver had more than 2 targets. Calvin Ridley had 7, and no wide receiver caught more than 1 pass. So, I mean, exactly what's happening in the passing game. It's going to Calvin Ridley, and if he's double covered, then you better hope one of the freshmen or Cam Sims or Robert Foster finds himself open, and that the offensive line can protect Jalen long enough. So I think they really need to mix it up and maybe get a little more creative in the passing game. I think with the running backs they have, that they're just so talented there that you wonder if, and we asked Damian Harris this, and it's not just with Damian, it's all around, whether they need to kind of give more carries to them. And Damian, to his credit, was very diplomatic in his response, and kind of said, Coach Saban knows what he's doing, and I think that's what they're going to trust going into Clemson.
Yeah, Damian, I asked him during the media availability if some of the fans, this was a loud kind of outcry from the fans that Damian wasn't getting the ball enough, and he's being a perfectly great teammate. But there's no way on earth I believe that, Chandler. As a competitor, there's no way I believe this guy's reeling off 8.5 a carry. And yeah, I'm fine if they want to set me. He's just being a good teammate, right?
Oh, yeah, and I think so, too. And look, I don't think it's just Damian either. I mean, there's some instances where Bo Scarborough this season has been, reeling off 8 and 10, and then he kind of disappears for a quarter. And then, the same thing with Josh Jacobs. They'll put Josh Jacobs in for a series, and they'll move the ball exceptionally well, and then you don't see Josh Jacobs for 3 more series. And I get that they've got such an abundance back there, and they want to get as many different guys in there with roles. But at the end of the day, Nick Saban said this during the season, and I can't remember when he said it, but he said, there are times when I'm on the sideline and when a guy gets hot, I just want to keep riding him. And we really haven't seen that happen this year. And maybe it changes in the college football playoff. Maybe if Damian breaks off some big runs in the first couple series of that game, they stick with him. Maybe it changes then. But, Nick Saban said at some point this year that he wants, at the sideline, he's got to fight himself sometimes to keep running with that hot guy. I don't know if he'll be able to fight himself much longer when they get into the college football playoff.
Wrapping up here with Chandler Rome. You can follow him on Twitter at Chandler_Rome. Alabama basketball has been off what feels like a couple weeks now, but it's only really been a week or so. They got 2 big games coming up. One against Mercer in Huntsville, and they follow that up with a neutral site in Birmingham against Texas. They got to have these, don't they? I mean, they've played a great out-of-conference schedule. The RPI is very good, but they need some wins. I mean, 7-3 is okay, but they gotta start collecting some of these W's, don't they?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you come out of this week with a split, I think you're happy. I think you're ecstatic if you go 2-0. But I mean, you look at that Texas game. They may not be in the top 25, but they have a lottery pick in Mom and Bamba inside, and I mean that's going to be a tall task for them on a neutral floor. Texas is without their leading scorer. I know he broke his wrist a couple of weeks ago, so that'll help. But yeah, I mean, you'd like for them to win, but you mentioned their RPI right now. I think when I checked this morning, I think they were 26. They're 26. They're in somewhere in that range, and you've got to get these. I know wins are what you judge a team by, but you've got to look at the schedule that Avery Johnson's put together. He put together this schedule so that they could absorb a couple of losses before SEC play, because he wants his team to learn, and he wants his team to not get into SEC play and feel too good about themselves being with 1 loss or no losses and go into SEC play and just get, kind of blindsided by what they're about to get. They're not going to be blindsided when they get into SEC play. The schedule that they've played has been really unbelievable. And I know Mercer I think they're 6-5 now, but Mercer went toe-to-toe with Memphis. They took Memphis to overtime in FedEx Forum, and Alabama had trouble with Memphis in that opener this season. So getting Braxton Key tomorrow night back for Alabama, I'm interested to see how they integrate him back in. Avery Johnson wanted to get his rotation down to 8-9 people, and he's got that 8-9 man rotation pretty set, or he's had it pretty set these last 2 games. It'll be interesting to see kind of whose minutes get cut with Braxton Key coming back. I assume they're going to integrate him very slowly. I doubt he'll play a ton of minutes, but as these next few games go on, I'll be interested to see whose minutes get cut. But this is a game in Huntsville that John Petty's looking forward to. Obviously, John Petty, Mr. Basketball and a Huntsville native, so look for him to be amped up. And this is a team you mentioned they haven't played in 10 days because of final exams, so they may be amped up to get back out on the court. Maybe a little rusty when they get back out on the court. So don't expect I wouldn't expect them to be firing on all cylinders, because a 10-day layoff will affect anybody. But yeah, this is a stretch right here, right before SEC play. They come out of this week 2-0 on neutral floors against 2 pretty good teams, 2 teams Joe Lenardi put in his bracketology this last week. Then I think they have a lot to be excited about going into SEC play.